Here on Ag PhD, you may have noticed over the years that Darren and I very rarely have any notes because we're usually just talking about things that we discuss every single day on the farm and with farmers from all over the country and really all over the world.
But as Brian's getting older and it's harder for him to remember things.
No, that's not it. It's just, when we start talking about the 2014 year in review, I got to pull out my notes because it's hard to remember all the things that happened starting from January going all through the year. Today on the show, what we wanted to do is talk a little about soybeans and wheat, and then we'll get to corn and some other issues in just a few minutes. But with soybeans, I guess overall, we're pretty happy with yields around the country. Most things turned out pretty well. But let's talk about the issues and the things we really need to be working on going into next year.
All right, first of all, let's get back to these notes. I think it's important as farmers that we do take notes on different soil types, what we've learned with different tillage implements, whatever it may be across our farm. Keep track of things because it's hard to remember, let alone just from this year, but 5 years or 10 years down the road. Man, how did we handle that back then? And I know it really worked, but I don't remember exactly what we did. The only way you're going to know that is if you keep good records on your farm. All right, so let's start off. First of all, last winter was so cold and it lasted so long into the spring that it changed everything. And we're going to talk about soybeans and wheat right here. But let's just start with soybeans. When we planted them, it was colder than it should have been. And what we end up seeing when we get those years where it's cool and wet in the spring and we plant beans early, we have more chance of getting disease problems. And whether it was SDS, which flared up in quite a few areas across the country this year, or just the overall performance of that plant doing poorly because it was cold, those are the things that stood out most to me.
Well, yeah, but let's look at all the diseases. Pythium, Phytophthora, there were a lot of disease issues. Seed treatments really paid this year. Now, granted, seed treatments pay most years, but this year, 2014, seed treatments paid a lot. So it's one of the things going into next year, a lot of people have said, well, I got to make sure I put the seed treatment on because I saw a big difference there. Yeah, we do. Hey, there's one other thing too, when we talk about these seed treatments that I guess I wanted to address right now. I know the EPA has been talking about banning neonicotinoids, which in our opinion is ridiculous. They're incredibly safe. They're seed treatment insecticides. And it's really the only seed treatment insecticide family we have left. That's it. It's Gaucho, Poncho, and Cruiser. While they're talking about, well, they don't pay much on soybeans. What? I don't even know what they're talking about. All the data shows it does pay. It's just,
and
oh yeah,
we don't. Pretty well, too.
No, I wouldn't go that far.
I sure would.
Well, it doesn't give you a 10 or 15 bushel gain, and that's the whole thing. So if we're talking about, oh, are we going to have dramatic yield gain? No, we're not going to have that. We're going to have 2 to 5 bushel gains, okay? It's not that huge a deal.
I can handle 100% return on my investment or more. That's fantastic.
It's way more than that. But the point is just, they're not looking at the economics of it. They're strictly looking at, well, let's try to cut all these different uses. You don't need to do that. All you need to do is cut all the post-emerge uses, and then all the issues with the neonics will go away. So anyway, that was one of the things. And when we talk about seed treatments, there was a good new one this year, Chloriva Complete, to help with soybean cyst nematode that actually kills the nematodes. So those are some of the most important things for me.
Well, there's so many lessons we learned in soybeans. I'll just give you a couple other ones. Since we were cool and wet early in the season, there's a new fungicide label that came out, Preaxor in furrow. We did just a little bit on our field day site and it looked fantastic. We're going to do some more trials with that next year. If it's as good or better than what Headline's been in furrow on our corn, we're going to be pretty excited. Then we look at early season, like V4 or so fungicide applications. Most of the fungicide use in soybeans has been focused on the reproductive stage. This year is a cool year, a lot of Septoria brown spot. We saw good returns putting that fungicide out early around V4. As far as new traits coming, we've got Enlist for soybeans where you can spray 2,4-D, and we've got Extend for soybeans where you can spray dicamba. We're looking for field production to happen this year, so there'll be some seed for farmers to plant in 2016. We'll see how all the approvals go, both in the US but also in China.
All right, let's change gears real quick and talk about wheat a little bit. What lessons did we learn in 2014? The number one thing that I saw in many areas of the country is we had an awful lot of head scab. So let's talk a little about how we're going to manage that particular disease, Fusarium head blight.
The big thing for me is you just have to be proactive with your fungicide use. And in some areas it was just, well, I've already sprayed twice. I don't want to have to go back in and spray
there was almost none of that. It was mainly just the fact that we didn't spray 3 times. A lot of guys don't spray at flag leaf. There's maybe 2 to 5% of the wheat that's raised in the United States where it gets a flag leaf fungicide treatment.
Really that low?
It's that low.
Wow.
And the problem is...
That's shocking. All right, shame on all of us. We need to be spraying at that time.
That's the problem. Look look at when on average you get the most yield gain out of a fungicide. It's at flag leaf, and that's when the fewest people spray. So that's an absolute must. I'd get that done. And then you got to spray at heading timing, and it's not just at heading timing. It's when the heads come out, when we're at about, let's call it 5 to 15% flowering. Okay, so it's a very, very narrow window. And then the other side of it is you can go the cheap way. You can go Aureus for $2 an acre. If you invest a few more dollars in something like Prosaro or Caramba, then you have a lot better gain. So if you did all 3 fungicide treatments, if you sprayed at heading at just the right timing with the right product, there were big time gains. And we're talking 10, 20 bushel gains. It was huge.
All right, the other thing that I was thinking about in wheat is the winter wheat crop that's in the ground right now has got some big time issues. We saw early season, there was moisture in the fall in a lot of these wheat growing areas. If you didn't get a cheatgrass treatment out, you're going to pay for that in the spring, and it's going to be tough to get it under control because it's already tillered out in many cases. Then the other thing is we had stripe rust late in the fall in October and November. In many areas of the country, we'll see what kind of winter we get, but be on the lookout early season. You're going to be out there for disease control in winter wheat.
Last 2 things that I had: low test weight, good yield, but low test weight. That's all because there wasn't enough nitrogen late in the season. So you can put some nitrogen on a little bit later. That's important in the short term. In the very long term, try to build your organic matter levels. That releases more nitrogen late in the season for free, so that's a good deal. The other thing I was going to say is we got a couple more pre-emerge herbicides labeled. Might not seem like a big deal to you. You might not have used a pre before in wheat, but this is really important as we start to see more resistant weeds popping up. So there is Varo, that's an ALS, and yes, you might already have ALS resistant weeds, but you can use that pre. But then Zidua is the other one. We haven't had group 15. That'd be similar to Harness, Surpass, Outlook Dual. We haven't had that group available in terms of chemistry in wheat before. Now we do.
Well, there's so many lessons that we learned in soybeans and wheat, and we're pretty excited about talking about those things, but we can't forget about corn and some of the other crops. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, take a look at our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?